Bartolotta, co-author of the Rett Syndrome Communication Guidelines. Theresa, thank you for joining us today.
Hi, Paige. Thank you so much, and thank you everyone for coming here today to be with us. We are so excited that on just about the first anniversary of the publication of the Rett Syndrome Communication Guidelines, we're able to share with you some real-world applications of those guidelines. And we have a terrific panel. We have a professional speech-language pathologist who will share her perspective, and then two parents of a younger girl with Rett syndrome and then an older girl with Rett syndrome. And everyone together will share their unique way that they've applied some of the information from the guidelines to their individual situation. So we're really excited. And as Paige said, we will begin with just a brief orientation as to how the guidelines were developed, share with you why they are so important and groundbreaking, because they are based on evidence. And then we'll talk, I'll switch to talking to each of our three interviewees, and then we will leave time for questions at the end because we are interested in hearing from all of you. I just want to disclose that I am one of the co-authors of the communication guidelines. I work as a clinical speech language pathologist here in the US, and I also do consulting on communication for individuals with Rett syndrome. And I am also the very proud mother of a 31-year-old young woman with Rett syndrome. So the Rett Syndrome Communication Guidelines are available for order from rettsyndrome.org. And there are two options. You can get a hard copy that you can, whoops, can you still see my screen? I'm sorry, I did something.
We can see you.
You can see me, you can see my slides?
We can.
Okay, so this is the problem with real world technology, everyone. I can't see my slides. So, oh, there they are, sorry. I did not want to look at myself. So there's two possibilities: a hard copy that you can order, and those are really beautiful copies. I've got one right here, and they're just really helpful to share with teachers, therapists, medical professionals, family members. And then the guidelines are also available as a downloadable PDF from the rettsyndrome.org website. I am speaking today representing the efforts of our entire project team. These are my colleagues who I had the privilege of working with for essentially a 5-year process. Leopold Curfs from the Netherlands provided oversight to the entire project. Our team lead was Jill Townend. She is a speech language pathologist from the Netherlands, also works for Rett UK. My colleague Helena Vondin is from Sweden, also a speech language pathologist. And then Anna Urbanowitz is an occupational therapist from Australia. And together, we developed the communication guidelines with funding from rettsyndrome.org. So we came together at a conference several years ago with a shared mindset that we knew that there was great potential for communication development in individuals with Rett syndrome, but there was very little evidence to support families and therapists developing intervention programs and figuring out how to advance the skills of people with Rett syndrome. So we had a mindset of positivity, of presuming competence, and also believing that there were no prerequisites for communication. We had a good understanding of Rett syndrome, and we all, given our clinical and personal experience, knew that there were specific characteristics of Rett syndrome that influenced communication, and that if you don't understand the impact of those characteristics, it can really get in the way of developing an effective communication program. We also have experience with augmentative and alternative communication, which is AAC, which means using other modalities to communicate other than just verbal speech. We all communicate using multiple modalities, but the individuals we work with who have Rett syndrome, most of them cannot rely on verbal speech for a full productive modality of communication. So we work with them to develop alternative modalities. For example, eye gaze, using their hands, gestures, body movements, vocalizations, etc. So our goal was to take our experience, do a deep dive into the literature and find out really what is the best evidence for how to develop communication in Rett syndrome, and to develop a resource that would be readable and accessible to individuals with varying levels of experience. And we really envisioned a global resource, and that's what we've tried to put together. So it was a three-step development process. We began with looking at the literature, and we studied over 300 pieces of literature, all in English language publications. We combined that with real-life experience. So we surveyed parents from across the globe. Our survey was translated into 16 languages, and we had parents from 39 countries, a total of 403 families weigh in and give us information about how their individuals in their family with Rett syndrome were communicating. We also did English language surveys of professionals from across the world. We had 120 participants from 19 countries give us their professional experience. So we took what was from the research, we took what was real life, we brought everything together, and we developed a set of over just about 300 statements, or we call them guidelines. There were statements or recommendations about how to approach communication in Rett syndrome, foundational principles of communication, features of Rett that influence communication, how to assess, and how to intervene. We developed these statements and we put them in front of a panel of 36 experts from 13 countries around the world. These experts were a combination of professionals who worked with individuals with Rett syndrome, but we set the bar so that they had a high level of experience, or they were parents, and for most of them, they were parents who, say, were heads of Rett syndrome associations in different countries, so that their information wouldn't always only just reflect their personal experience, but they could speak on behalf of the many, many families that they interacted with. So that final expert consensus process, which is a research methodology called the Delphi process, was how we went through the guidelines and had the experts weigh in on each individual guideline. And from that, we developed this series of statements of 271 statements that could be used by families, therapists, teachers, and medical professionals across the world to guide their practice of communication with individuals with Rett syndrome. So the guidelines, when they were first published, were published in English, but our goal was always to translate the guidelines into as many languages as possible so we could reach every corner of the globe. We have excellent news today. The Spanish translation is about to be released, and we are so excited about that. And we have other translations that are coming very soon, including Russian, Turkish, Dutch, British English, and that would be for individuals in the UK and Ireland, because the English publication that we have now is really using American English terminology, and also German. So here's a preview of the copy of the front cover of the Spanish guidelines, which will be released very shortly. And we want to thank the Spanish and Catalan Rett associations for their volunteer efforts to translate these guidelines into Spanish. And as I said, other languages are coming soon. So the guidelines are structured into 8 chapters, and they begin, say, with overviews about principles on how to approach individuals who have complex communication challenges. And so principles, for example, of approaching individuals from a perspective of competence. That does not mean that there is not some sense of disability or some developmental challenges that these individuals face. We're not saying that. We're saying that every individual has the potential to communicate, And so we approach every single individual, regardless of previous experience or age level or severity of their disorder, that they have the potential to communicate. There is no ceiling. So we have guiding principles like that that will guide the practices of approaching individuals with Rett syndrome, that communication is a right, and how teams should work to include the individual with Rett syndrome and their family into the communication assessment and planning process. We have guidelines for professional practice for teams. Then we have a chapter on the features of Rett syndrome and coexisting conditions. And that chapter is a key chapter, and I'll get into that in a little bit more detail in just a moment. I have a couple of slides on that, because some families have let us know that that is really one of the most important chapters in this guide, because Rett syndrome is a low incidence disorder. And many people who are working with people with Rett syndrome are just working with one person with Rett syndrome, and they haven't had the experience to understand how features of Rett syndrome can influence communication. And so what we do in this chapter is we go through these features and we help individuals figure out how those features might be impacting communication. We have strategies to optimize engagement. So how do you interact with someone with Rett? How do you engage them? How do you find out what their interests are? And then we have principles for general communication assessment, and then we get into AAC. And these final chapters, 5 through 8, where we talk about AAC assessment and then assessment of specific devices and then get into intervention, these final chapters can actually also be applicable to individuals who do not have Rett syndrome. So by helping teachers and therapists work with their students or their clients who have Rett syndrome, who have challenges in communicating, these guidelines are also helping them work with other individuals who are not verbal, who they are working with in their classroom or their clinic settings. So we've now had the guidelines out for a year, and we've been very interested in trying to gather information on the impact. So in 2020, RettSyndrome.org surveyed all of the purchasers of the guidelines to gather feedback on their use. And the respondents overwhelmingly reported that they were clear and easy to read and very comprehensive. And we have just some sample quotes here that the one person felt that the guidelines were very helpful, especially to those who are just at the start of their journey, who are just trying to figure out communication. The second quote has to do with those features of Rett syndrome that I referenced earlier, that even for people who have been trying to work with their individual with Rett for a while to help them communicate, the guidelines help you understand about, say, apraxia or motor disorders and how those movement disorders might impact someone's ability to respond quickly or to respond consistently. So even someone with lots of experience in Rett syndrome has found these to be helpful. In the last quote references webinars that we've done. My colleague Jill Townend and I did a series of 4 Facebook Lives for RettSyndrome.org. The first one started just about a year ago, and they were done with RettSyndrome.org. And we focused on engagement strategies for communication as well as intervention. And you'll find links to those 4 Facebook Lives on the chat. They are on RettSyndrome.org's YouTube channel. And those each are about, say, 90 minutes long. And what we have in those is we have lots of detailed information about those chapters in the guidelines on engagement and intervention. And we have lots of videos of early communicators, of communicators using very simple communication systems and communicators using very complex communication systems. So those are great resources for you to watch to really see the communication guidelines in action. I want to give you just some examples of some of the guideline statements. So this image is from the chapter on features of communication that impact, features of Rett syndrome that impact communication. And so some of the points that we stress is that each individual is unique. Not everyone is going to have every specific feature. You'll take the individual that you're working with, you'll get to know them, and then you can use that chapter to inform how you approach them based on how they present. This is a figure that we have in the guidelines that shows around the circle all of the potential features of Rett syndrome and coexisting conditions that can impact communication. So, for example, in the upper left, we have dyspraxia and apraxia, which are motor movement disorders that result in maybe a delay in activating a motor response, whether that be a vocalization, an eye blink, a head turn, or a gesture or a hand movement. So we define and describe those terms for you in the guidelines, and then we have a paragraph that talks specifically about how someone with, say, apraxia, how their communication could be impacted by having apraxia. So we found that it's been really helpful for individuals because we really tried to consider all of the particular features that you may see in Rett syndrome. I want to stress that not every individual with Rett syndrome has all of these features because it really is a heterogeneous disorder. But a lot of individuals with Rett syndrome have these characteristics, and understanding how they impact communication can really help you in your assessment as well as your intervention. These are some other tips that we have based on that. The value of making eye contact and using multimodal communication. Speaking directly to the person with Rett syndrome as if they understand you, and honoring their potential for communication. Always be aware of delayed response times. We've seen in literature that response times can take as long as 30 seconds. That's a really long time to wait. So we want, if we present someone with a question or we give them a request, we want to wait and allow them to try to overcome some of those difficulties, maybe with alertness, with motor skills. Maybe breathing is affecting their response. We want to recognize there's a delayed response time and then give them the opportunity to respond. And always make sure that vocabulary, topics, and the activities are appropriate to their interests. And you can learn that by interviewing the individuals who are most close to them. I want to share with you some, whoops, sorry, I went too fast. There we go. Okay, I want to share, my apologies. I want to share with you some images of some users of communication, users of AAC who have Rett, and these slides are from one of our previous talks. So this is, these are pictures of individuals who are using other modalities than speech to communicate, and they're using unaided communication, so no tech. So they're using eye gaze, they might be using vocalizations or head turns. They are communicating. So we want you to understand that communication can encompass all of these modalities, and it is very common for individuals with Rett syndrome to communicate using multiple modalities. So if you look at the little girl in the upper left, she's using eye gaze right now to communicate with her brother. She also vocalizes, and she also uses a high-tech communication device. All of those modalities are genuine. These are some examples of individuals who use aided communication. So they use something like a picture book or a visual display or some cards or a yes/no board. These are low-tech communication devices. So you'll see some individuals use low-tech only. Some will use high tech, those are the electronic devices only, or some will use both. And actually in the guidelines, we recommend that individuals who have a high tech device also have access to a low tech device, because high tech devices are not necessarily applicable in every situation. So these are some examples of some low tech devices, and you can see a picture of someone who's actually in a pool using her communication device to communicate. These are then examples of high-tech devices, and you can see that we've got a range of age levels here and different situations in which people are using high-tech devices to communicate. And I want to show you on this next image that there is no one specific layout of vocabulary, no one specific device that we recommend. There are a range of devices, a range of vocabulary systems, and we have suggestions in the guidelines on how to approach development, choosing a vocabulary, whether you begin with a very large vocabulary for an individual or whether you begin with a small vocabulary. You'll find that there are some people who might have a particular philosophy that would lead you to believe that there is only one right way, but we are saying in our evidence-based guidelines, there is no one right way. There are lots of different ways, and everyone is unique, and we have to work with their individual capabilities and their experiences to see what's right for them. So now we can turn to our real-world application. So today we have 3 interviews. We will begin with Andrea Etke, who is a speech-language pathologist, working with a young girl named Ella, who is 10, almost 11. Andrea has lots of experience with other individuals with Rett syndrome, so she's got a rich story. We also have 2 mothers of wonderful girls with Rett syndrome. Sarah Morrison will follow Andrea. Her daughter Shannon is 3. And then we will end with Shelby Swan, mother to Kendall, who is 16. So now what I'd like to do is invite Andrea to turn on her webcam so everyone can see Andrea.
Hi, Theresa. Hi, everybody.
Hi.
Thank you for having me this afternoon.
Welcome, Andrea. So if you can take over now, tell us a little bit about yourself, and you're going to introduce Ella to the audience.
Of course. So I am a speech language pathologist down here in sunny South Florida. I am licensed and ASHA certified. I have been working in many different environments, such as skilled nursing, home health with adults. I've worked in the public school system here in Palm Beach County, and I have worked in my own solo private practice for about 6 years now. I have started working with an individual with Rett syndrome about 7 years ago, and she's kind of sparked my interest in the disorder and how communication is so vital. And so because of that, I kind of have, there's Ella, because of that, working with this individual who actually is a different girl, not Ella, kind of just gave me this light bulb of, whoa, there's a lot of communication that can be done here and a lot of work to be done. So today I'm excited to tell you about Ella. She is one of my clients. She is a 10-year-old girl. She loves reading and she loves American Girl dolls. And she recently got an adaptive bicycle, which is really cool that she can ride with one of her parents. Unfortunately, she has had a recent resumption of some seizures that they're working through with medication management. She does have, these are some of the, in the guidelines, some of the coexisting comorbidities with Rett syndrome, just to give you a full picture. She does have some scoliosis, limited hand use. She does have difficulty swallowing, eating, and drinking. And she has some sleep difficulties, and Ella does use a wheelchair for ambulation. So today I'm going to get to share with you just a short 1-minute clip about me interacting with Ella during one of our sessions, and after you watch the video, I'm going to just point out a few things and then just talk about the work that I'm doing with Ella, as far as her communication abilities, and then how I've applied the communication guidelines to my sessions with Ella, and where I would like to see her go, or where she can go, you know, furthering her communication abilities. So I'm going to start the video in a second, and I want you to pay attention to how I'm modeling on her device, how I'm addressing and talking to Ella directly, how she uses multimodal communication. She's going to use, you'll see her use her eyes to manipulate her eye gaze device, the high-tech communication like Theresa was speaking about, but then she also uses eye gaze just to look towards me for communication as well. So let me see if I can pull this up.
So we have to make you the presenter.
Yes. Okay.
Okay. So there's your screen. Great.
Okay. All right. So I'm going to hit play.
I am happy. I'm happy. I'm happy. What about you, Ella? I am feeling.
So this is that prolonged wait time that you were referring to, Theresa. Takes her about 20 seconds or so to get able to select what she wants.
You look happy. I'm gonna go back one. I'm gonna take you off the good page. You did, didn't you? Funny. Funny. I am funny. You were feeling funny. What are you wanting? Ugh. This guy. All right, one more time, then we're gonna get to work, okay?
Okay. So you can take, do you want to take back over the screen? I'll talk while you take that over. So why I chose that clip selection to share with everybody today is because I think it's a nice picture of a few of the engagement strategies that you speak about in the communication guidelines. I picked something that's very engaging to Ella. That monkey toy is something that she loves, and so it's something that she's excited about and interested to not only request but to talk about. Her and I always start off our sessions by saying how we're feeling or catching up on, you know, how was your weekend or what are things that you did. So I model on her screen by actually touching the buttons. I am happy, that was my modeling. And then I went ahead and I put in I am sentence for her and then allowed her to pick her feeling off of the page, and she picked funny. So that's to tell you a little bit more about Ella. From the beginning, she was diagnosed around 22 months, and she doesn't have one of the common 8 variants of Rett syndrome. And quickly, her parents enrolled her in some early intervention services. She received a eye gaze device in around preschool age, and she was using Communicator 4, which is a very old communication system. And she did have some seizure activity, some fatigue, and the sleep difficulties that I mentioned. Ella had worked through some joint attention issues, meaning she had difficulty so moving her attention from one task to another, or engaging with another person at the same time as using her high-tech communication device. In the beginning, Ella had very preferred and restrictive interests, which we worked through, but her receptive language was always a relative strength of hers. She always, we always had a strong sense that she knew what we were talking about, what we were saying, and she had very good comprehension during shared reading exercises, and she always had a very strong eye contact. So, okay. And working with her kind of in the middle, first and second and third grade. She was in a hospital homebound program here, and that's what we call it here in Palm Beach County, where she was in the public school system, but the service providers came to her home. She did have me every week and physical therapy and a teacher. At this point, we changed her communication device to upgrade it with a newer version of the communication software. And I mention that because I think it's an accomplishment for Ella that even fighting through the dyspraxia that we know is there, she was able to learn a new communication system, to retrain her eyes where she previously knew there were buttons, to learn on the screen where the same button would be, but maybe in a different location. So I just like to brag about her a little bit. And she continued to have some sleep difficulties and increased difficulty with eating and drinking. She improved her attention skills one-on-one and expanded her interests and really showed a liking for different books and different TV shows and commenting during shared reading. Her best yes and no is something I wanted to mention because as Theresa referred previously in her slides, we should give individuals with Rett syndrome options to communicate in their preferred method in their abilities at that time. So sometimes Ella can't access her Tobii Dynavox device for whatever reason, whatever's going on, but she has a very hard yes. She will look you straight in the eyes and hold your eye gaze there for yes, for, you know, is this the page you wanted? Are you in pain? Are you hungry? Just those when you really need to have a clear answer to something. That's something that we, you know, that I've use, and it's helpful to know exactly, you know, what Ella is thinking at that time if she's not able to access her high-tech device.
Andrew, before we move on, if you can just talk about how you determined the best yes. We talk about that in the guidelines, and we're going to hear a little bit about the best yes from Sarah later when she talks about Savannah. But some AAC specialists will talk about developing that first. If you have someone who doesn't have a communication system yet at all, working with them to establish what looks like a yes, and it could take many different forms. So that's why we say best yes, because it's something that is fairly consistent and appears to indicate that the person is acknowledging a yes response. So was that your experience with Ella?
I would say yes. I would say that over the course of months and years of working with her, you get to know a person's mannerisms and tendencies. And it was very clear that over and over and over again, Ella would look towards me during the sessions to indicate yes or affirmation. I also give her that verbal cue at times. We do work on spelling a lot this year. So if she has an array of 4 or 5 letters and we're working on spelling a word, I ask her, Ella, look at the letter that you want and then turn your head to look at me in my eyes for yes. And so just giving her that verbal cue over and over again allows me to know that that's her affirming the choice that she's made.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome. So presently, this past school year was interrupted by COVID and presented some challenges, but we worked through it. We continued with speech therapy and she was getting PT. We also upgraded her device communication software to SnapCore, and she's done fantastic with this new program. She does have some more seizure activity and we're working through that, as I mentioned. She's really enjoying exploring new activities and topics. I basically forced her to play with slime with me one day, even though that wouldn't have been her preferred choice, but she's a good sport. And again, her receptive language remains to be a relative strength, and we have incorporated now the Making Words program for spelling to focus on spelling skills so that she can be a more efficient writer. So that's what we're working on this year together.
Excellent.
So for the future, I would really like to see Ella continue to expand her complexity of her messages that she uses that she creates on her Toby, increasing the use of core and fringe vocabulary for sure. Initiating conversation with others is something that we've seen her begin to do, but even if it's just 1 or 2 words acknowledging a person, something that we think that she's trying to bring up a topic. So I'd like to see her continue to improve in that area. Writing more, and peer connections, I think, is a very fun thing. In Ella's home, they have a lot of, a strong community of friends and young people that really engage well with Ella, and I'd like to see her engage, more with her peers. So that's what we're working on.
That's really great. You're working on all aspects of communication, it sounds like. For our audience members who are not very familiar with AAC, I just want to mention that the terms here for core and fringe vocabulary refer to different types of vocabulary that you'll use in different settings. So core vocabulary is actually kind of what it sounds like, the core of your vocabulary, and those would be words that you would use over and over again regardless of the situation. So yes, no, me, you, hello, goodbye, things like that. More, all done. That's awesome. You can have core words that could apply to all different contexts that someone or situations someone could be in. And then fringe vocabulary has to do with vocabulary specific to a particular setting. So if you're all going to go out to eat together, once we're allowed to, then that's going to be your fringe vocabulary for ordering off a menu. Going to school, you have lots of fringe vocabulary. You can have fringe vocabulary for history lessons, for science, things like that. So we always want to think about the possibility of expanding vocabulary so that individuals can be prepared to communicate in whatever situation they're in. And in the guidelines, we talk about the use of core and fringe vocabulary in different ways to represent those on your communication devices. We also have some information on literacy because we all believe that access to print is very important for the individuals with Rett syndrome. And there are lots of reports of individuals with Rett syndrome who are able to read and also to be able to write and or spell. So this is your last slide, Andrea, I believe.
I think so. I just wrote, I bulleted a few of the guidelines that I believe I employ while I'm working with Ella or my other clients that use EAC. And I think I have been working with individuals with Rett syndrome longer than the communication guidelines have existed, but it was affirming when the guidelines came out to see what I've been doing in print to show that it has evidence behind it, that these are strategies that work. So that is why I love the guidelines. So we do use a very varying multimodal communication. Like I said, Ella uses high-tech devices, but she also uses eye gaze. We also use a board for, 4 choices. We also use yes and no. We also use her best yes. We use prolonged wait time. We give her prolonged wait time and respect that her answer may take longer than, like I said in the video, was I think 25 or 27 seconds. Had I stopped in that middle and re-prompted her, then I've set her back into reprogramming that whole motor movement again. So I give her that long wait time. I do avoid direct questioning or testing her, and I acknowledge her communication attempts. For example, when she said in the clip, she looked at the word wanting, she selected wanting on her device, and then she looked right at the monkey that was in my hand, and the word monkey was not on her screen. That would have taken 4 or 5 more pages to get to monkey, and so it was perfect of her to just look directly at the thing that she was wanting. And so I thought that that was a good image of this guideline being used. And we use activities and topics that are relevant, so the engagement is very important to me.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Andrea, for sharing your story with Ella. And so what we'll do is we'll keep you with us, but we'll have you turn off your camera now so we can invite Sarah to turn her camera on so she can talk with us a little bit about Savannah. And then Andrea, if there are questions for you at the end, you know, I'd love you to weigh in on questions. So hi, Sarah, welcome to our webinar. I'm so grateful that you took some time out of your very busy life to share with us your story about your special Savannah, who's 3, and how you've been communicating with her. So can you begin by telling us about how you've used communication with her and how the guidelines have been helpful?
Thank you so much for having me. I should start with Savannah. She's bright and happy and she's ready to communicate. You know, we say they're each individuals, and I love that you say that. And Savannah has an eagerness to communicate, and that's been fantastic for us. You know, we trialed our AAC devices. We trialed both the PRC and the Toby, and she was fantastic with them. She was putting together 4 to 5 word sentences. She let us know her preference was the PRC though, so we'll be going with that. But we have been without a high-tech device for about 6 months because of all the politics of insurance. So while we work through that process, it's actually been better for us in a way because we're learning to communicate in other ways. And we have a communication board, which we've always used, but she wouldn't use it when she was stressed out and upset. And one of the biggest things that I have gotten from the communication guidelines is that a yes, no is so critical. Savannah used to be able to say yes, no, head nods and head shakes, but did we use them all the time and get consistent? No, we didn't. And between me and her 2 SLPs, one's private and one's through her school, who are both fantastic, we all decided that we needed to get a sufficient yes, no. And so Savannah, you know, for us, it wasn't cards because those are not Savannah's best things when she's upset. So her yes is a very similar to what Andrea said. It's a look into your eye and it's a lean forward. Sometimes she gets her head nod, and that's fine. If she gets her head nod, great, but she doesn't always get it. So it's this, and she cannot consistently shake her head at all anymore. So her no is a very clear look away and lean away. And it's become our main form of communication anymore in our household, really. And it's incredible because sometimes it takes a million questions, but she always gets to what she wants. You know, she's non-mobile. She can't go get her communication board if she doesn't have it in front of her. So this is a great way if it's just a quick, hey, Savannah, you seem grumpy. Is everything okay? She can tell me yes or no. And a prime example is that when she's been in pain before, we've been able to pinpoint the problem. And she has a high pain tolerance like many of our girls. And so when we can consistently get an answer, we know she's in pain, and it's really fantastic. You know, are you in pain? Yes. Is it your knee? No. Is it your foot? No. Is it your tummy? And so on until we find the right answer. And it's been critical to us to keeping her happy, really, because she's no longer feeling pain for no reason, and she feels heard. And sometimes she'll be mad and I'll ask her what's wrong and I'll finally get to the answer, and she'll suddenly cheer up when she understands. And the real problem is she wanted somebody to know what was going on and understand her.
Wow, that's an amazing story. Amazing. There's so much in your story that you've said. So I want to just highlight a couple of things, and then I have some questions for you. So, you know, sometimes families will ask for, you know, what's the best communication device, or what's the best way to access communication for individuals with Rett syndrome. And so what you've told us is that you went with her, with Savannah. You trialed different devices, and there were perhaps certain nuances about the PRC device, which is what you're going to go with, over what the other devices that she saw, that made it seem like that was a better fit. And so that's a really important message. There is no one size fits all. The other thing that you mentioned is that you're using a communication board right now, right for her. So can you share how you decided maybe what kinds of vocabulary should be on that board and how are they represented? Are they photos? Are they icons or symbols? Is there text?
Well, I have it right here. I can show you a little bit of it.
Sure.
We keep a binder full of all sorts of symbols. I find that that's really important for us, that we can quickly access what we want with dividers. This right here has some of the core words that we always keep on it. So this is our communication board, so we can see what she's looking at from the other side. We try to keep drink up for her. Now, she likes saying Savannah. I'm backwards. I'm having a hard time. She likes saying Savannah, and then she'll tell us what she wants. And so we've added I want so that she can start learning the I want vocabulary. So when she looks at her name, she looks at her picture, I should say, then I also say, oh, so Savannah wants, I want, and then I can move across to drink or to snack or whatever else she has. We also leave a no up there for her all the time. And we also have a big space where we can fill in. So if we're working on colors, if we're working on letters, we have a big area that we can swap out for what we're doing in that moment.
Great. So so families, that would be a low-tech aided form of AAC, where Savannah is using eye gaze. So the clear plexiglass is great because you and she can maintain eye contact and you can see which direction her eyes are going. How quick or how slow is she to respond? Do you need to wait?
For the most part, Savannah responds immediately, but it's not consistent. She definitely has apraxia that sometimes kicks in. So sometimes we look at a 20-second wait. And so sometimes I'll ask her a question and she'll answer immediately, I know. And sometimes it'll be a yes, then a no, and I'll ask the question again, or same thing with the board. She'll look at something and then she'll look at something else. And I'll ask her again because I can tell she was in the middle of thinking. So her apraxia kicked in. I'm not sure which one she really meant. And then she can usually make the choice more clear again.
Okay, terrific. And I'm glad that you said that maybe like a yes, no card wasn't the right thing for her. You decided that just using her body was important. So that's really good too, is that there's no one way to do a yes, no. So you're speaking to people who are representing individuals with Rett syndrome all across the spectrum. I know you said to me when we met last week, it's important for individuals to be consistent. Do you have any other really important messages for them in terms of how they can approach communication?
I think a big part of it is obviously consistency, but it's finding what's right for your girl. Savannah made it very clear quickly what was going to be something she could easily do every time and something she preferred. She likes using her body. She likes engaging with eye contact. So it was a really good way for her. I think finding what she seemed happy with was huge. And then the consistency, I mean, over and over and over. We spent several weeks of just nonstop asking her stuff she already knew. You know, what's your favorite animal? Is it a rhinoceros? No. Is it a horse? Yes. You know, so that kind of thing. So consistent, and doing things that you know the answer to and she knows the answer to, so you know that she understands the program.
Right. That's a great point. Well, Sarah, I want to thank you so much. I think your information is so valuable and just really uplifting for everyone to hear. And good luck. I'm sorry that it's taking you so long to get your devices, but she is not without communication while you're waiting, right? And it's only going to help her expand. So thank you so much. And so we'll talk to you later. So Sarah's going to stay with us. We're just going to have her turn off her webcam so we can invite in Shelby. And Shelby is mom to daughter Kendall, who is 16. Hey, Shelby, thank you so much for your patience. And so you and I had talked about a kind of a different perspective. Your daughter's older. She's been around, you've been around. So I'd like you to share what some of the highlights of her communication story and how you've used the guidelines, especially with the team members who are working with Kendall, especially as she changes schools, so that they can understand how people with Rett syndrome can communicate and how they can facilitate that.
Yeah, so listening to everybody, Theresa, I was shaking my head. Yes, yes, the whole time. It's all so much a part of what we do for our girls, right? You have a daughter as well that's older. And so what I want to concentrate on is with Kendall, we decided change is hard. It's hard in a typical life to make a big change, right? So we decided Kendall was in the same school program since she was 3 years old. And it was great for a while. And it was very, she was separate from typical kids. She had great teachers, great therapists all the way through. And one of the main things that they pointed out to me very early on is it's super, super important for Kendall not to get used to communicating with one person. We want her to communicate with a lot of people in different ways and so on and so forth. So early on, we did exactly what everybody was saying, low tech, high tech, and everywhere in between tech, right? So I decided to make a big move, and it wasn't very far miles wise, but it was a big deal for the school district that we were leaving because it was the best. That's what we heard. So we came back to my hometown and went into a program that was at the local high school. And I was so nervous as a mom for what Kendall was going to experience and how far back it was going to set her in her communicating and in her just general schoolwork, how long it was going to take people to get to know her. And magically, this communication handbook the timing was unbelievable. And so I had my copy and I sent it to school, to the speech pathologist who happens to be a childhood friend of my oldest daughter. And the teachers are fabulous there. Kendall has 4 teachers and all of them looked over the communication guideline. And I think it changed how they were going to treat her in their therapy sessions, just based on everything that was in there about Rett syndrome. There's so many things that our girls and boys have with Rett syndrome that's different than other syndromes that are out there, the wait time, if you will. I think one of my biggest concerns at her old school was you're not waiting long enough when the apraxia is there. She has an answer, or she has answered so quickly and you didn't notice. She's impatient. So this group of women and men, they had it all wrapped up with this communication guideline. They never had anybody with Rett syndrome. And let me tell you, if that girl is communicating and she is thriving in this new environment, and with tools like a communication guideline, I needed it when she was 3. So, but it's still a long time. A really great tool. And I know I packed a lot of information in really quick, but just for lack of not boring everybody with the details.
Well, so how is Kendall communicating now?
So Kendall uses many different ways to communicate. She's a low-tech communicator. We come up with all kinds of ways, just like Andrea showed. She uses a board. She uses her best yes is very evident and easy for everyone to know what she's doing. Even the students at the high school know Kendall's best yes. And then she also uses her Toby. But as technology goes, we can't rely on the Toby. We can't always take the Toby with us or have it moving around in her wheelchair with her when we're, say, going to the washroom at Rush when we're there for an appointment. So we need many ways to communicate. And so that girl is just, she is a communicator, and she loves all different ways of communicating.
That's terrific. I think, you know, we've had such a great range of stories today about different kinds of different ages and different kinds of abilities but there are some common themes across all. What would be, say, a takeaway message, say for a parent? Now you've got an older girl, so there are parents listening of little people with Rett syndrome, but there are also parents of adults who've never had a communication system, and they're wondering, is it too late? Did I miss a particular moment? What would you say?
You know, Theresa, I think that's something that's amazing, because these girls and boys are so smart, and a lot of times are already communicating, and the parent maybe doesn't even realize it. Even when they're 2.5, there is a way that they are communicating their need. We all have infants before regression, before Rett syndrome is diagnosed. We know what the baby wants when their cry is a certain way. They need to be fed, they need to be changed. And so there's a language all their own. I mean, Kendall yells and I know what the deal is. Her movie stopped, or she's hungry, or she needs to go to the washroom. And I think that's my biggest takeaway for new parents is, you know, just start dialing into what it is you do when they are communicating a certain way. Add in something new, like Andrea said. She's repeating the same thing. What's your favorite animal? A pig? No, of course not, Mom. You're silly. You know, and just keep doing things over and over and over again. And you will, even without a speech pathologist in the room, you're going to figure out what the best yes is right away, or the best no. And I think with older kids, it's the same way. How are you finding out what your daughter, Theresa, likes or doesn't like? I mean, she has a professional for a mother, for crying out loud. How lucky is she?
I don't think she'd think that was so great always. Yeah, but Lisa, who's 31, Lisa's very effective at her communication. And I think what's great about hearing you talk about Kendall, how she's still continuing to grow, she's in school, and I can share my perspective with Lisa, is that there still are a lot of people out there who are concerned that perhaps Rett syndrome is a disorder of regression as they get older, and that individuals are not capable of learning, and they are at high risk of loss of skill. And that is actually not true. There's, as I said earlier, there's no ceiling, and there's always opportunities for change and improvement. And I've seen that with Lisa. At 31, she's still getting physical and occupational therapy, and she's still getting stronger. She's becoming a better walker. She's continuing to improve, and I think that's a great message that we can give as talking about individuals who are a little bit older, that there's a great deal of hope. So thank you so much, Shelby, for your input. I think what we'll do now, since we've heard these rich stories from everyone, is we'll invite all of our attendees to turn their cameras back on. And what we're going to do is we're going to shift to starting to try to answer some of the many questions that have come in. And I can ask Paige right now. Paige, are there, because I haven't seen, are there pressing questions that we should answer live? I've tried to answer some of the themes of the questions through the interviews. Or Katie, you know, how should we proceed?
So Paige actually got kicked off of the internet. So I will be trying to fill her shoes the best that I can to help you guys close out this wonderful RettEd. Thank you, ladies, for everything. That was amazing. And I'll just run through the questions, Theresa. If you want to give answers, and then Shelby and Andrea and Sarah, if you want to pipe in with anything. I think that's how we'll go. All right.
Okay, super.
So first question, how can we better train our educators and staff to better communicate with our girls?
So get by the guidelines, get the guidelines. But I think what you've heard today is you've heard lots of strategies on how to share the information. Understanding every person with Rett syndrome is unique, but there are commonalities. And I think if there was one key chapter in the guidelines, it's, well, there's two. It's understanding about the impact of the features of Rett syndrome on communication, and then also there's a chapter on engagement. So you've heard some themes today, approaching from a perspective of competence. Everyone has the potential to communicate, and there is no ceiling. Learning about their individual characteristics. You've heard about inconsistencies today, prolonged wait time. I'm not going to stop and wait 20 seconds to talk because it would feel like an eternity. But after this webinar is over, everybody just look at your phone, iPhone or your watch, and wait 20 seconds and just see how long that is. And that's how long it takes for a response. And so believing that someone communicate and then giving them the opportunity to show you how they communicate. And you've heard that learning about their individual characteristics can really go a long way. Anybody else want to add? Anything? No? Okay, let's keep going, Katie.
We'll keep going. Let's see, how do I keep my loved one with Rett syndrome interested and concentrated and not falling asleep?
Okay, so fatigue, varying levels of alertness, those are characteristic of Rett syndrome. So some of that may not be under their volitional control. We have a really nice image in the guidelines about trying to work with individuals when they are very well regulated. So when they're in homeostasis, when they're not agitated, when there aren't physical things going on like seizures or spells, Rett spells, where it looks like they're kind of having a seizure, or when they've got GI issues that are really disrupting them. So we want them in this level of regulation. And so we've got some strategies on how to recognize when they're not regulated and how to get them back. But I think one thing is recognizing that some of this is not under their volitional control. However, some of it is. My daughter is a master at pretending she's asleep when she doesn't want to do something you want her to do. So she's got that down. But I think what we've heard is that we have to figure out what their interests are and recognize if you can find something that is engaging, you're going to see their best capabilities. Anybody have any suggestions on how to do that?
For me, just as a parent and what worked with Kendall, and it still works today, it worked when she was 2, it's still working at 16. If I have goldfish crackers, she will do whatever I want. So it's just motivating to her, whether it's a goldfish cracker or, hey, you're not going to watch your show until you can tell me what it is that you're wanting or why you're complaining. And also, Theresa, as you know, they're not always happy. They're not always available, if you will, with Rett syndrome. And they can sometimes communicate that need during the tantrum or whatever it is they're showing. And it's hard. It's awful sometimes. But, you know, I think finding what motivates them. And then also, Sarah mentioned the same thing, that when her daughter was frustrated, like, what's wrong? Is it this? No. Is it that? No. And so if you're able to just hear them out, and I've seen that same thing from Kendall. So just kind of asking many questions. I know that's a little different than the child sleeping, But, you know, again, it's maybe they're faking, because they all the girls I think do that I know have fake sleep a time or two. I wish I could do that.
Go ahead.
I thought of, in the communication guidelines, if any of the participants have it in front of them, page 29 has this nice sensory regulation chart. I think that that's helpful to see if the individual, where they would fall. I think that's what you were referencing, Theresa, as far as being regulated. And I think that, yeah, like Shelby said, Ella loves music and she loves that monkey toy that was in the video. So sometimes if she seems fatigued, I'll pick one of those things to kind of like, pump her up. We might sing a fun song or play a video. One of my other girls that I work with, she sometimes is just standing up and taking a walk around the house and kind of getting the juices flowing, getting the blood flowing, and then coming back to sit down to get her a little bit more awake and ready to learn. So I think you hit the nail on the head, which is, know the individual that you're working with or your family member. I think of working with because it's work for me. They're all my clients. But just know their interest levels. I think that helps. Fresh air helps too, right? Like think about yourself too.
Yeah, Lisa at some points will use she has an I need a break card. And so sometimes she just needs a change. But I also think that it's really important that we don't always think that they're just avoiding, that we want to rule out that there isn't something physical going on, because they have so many physical issues. We struggled this past summer and fall. Lisa was just not herself and we couldn't figure out what was wrong. Turns out she had a gallbladder issue, which is very common in Rett syndrome, and she had to have her gallbladder removed. And so it was a really complicated process to try to, figure out that there was something wrong there. And now looking back, it explains a lot of the behaviors where she was really unable to let us know that she had that pain.
Sarah, is there any good motivators for Savannah? Like, what are her?
Yeah, Savannah is a foodie. She does not have the failure to thrive issues that a lot of the Rett girls had. She will eat until she pops. And so if we're struggling with something, it helps to have a snack available. So she can look at her communication board and say snack. And I can say, oh, well, we need to finish this piece first, and then you can have a bite. So for Savannah, the big motivator is, okay, I can have a bite of a snack after I finish this. And it's also just finding what works for her. She doesn't like little letters stuck to her communication board. She likes to play with flashcards for letters. So at 3, she's learning letter recognition. And so if I put 3 flashcards in front of her, she'll be willing to try to pick out the letter. But if it's on her communication board, she's not interested.
Great.
So I think we'll hit this one last question, and it's a good one, and then we'll kind of wrap up. And if we didn't get to your questions, we will email them out to you once we have the answers for you. So here it comes. I'm going to have a student with Rett next year in my class. Please provide all things I should know. So maybe kick us off with some words of advice, some tips and tricks.
If you can begin by I would interview the parent and find out about how is that student doing physically. Do they have any medical issues? So find out what's going on with them from a physiological standpoint, so you can get a sense of how they're going to be throughout the day. What is their tolerance for length of activities? Do they have difficulties with fatigue, with varying alertness? A lot of the individuals have seizures. They have scoliosis. They have respiratory issues, and they have gastrointestinal issues. So I'd really find out from a health perspective what's going on. And then I want to find out what is really motivating, what gets their attention, what keeps them excited and interested for as long as for their, their best attention. And then I'd want to know, how are they communicating what they need, what they want, and find out about that yes, no. And I'll let the others weigh in.
I think I have one huge thing is presume competence, because our kids are intelligent. Sometimes they just don't want you to know that, and they may not be giving you the answer that you want. I happen to have a jokester, and she'll answer incorrectly just to get everybody to laugh. It's her go-to to make, something that's not fun for her. So presume competence, because we all want our kids to know that we think they're smart, that the therapists think they're smart, and they are smart. I think that's the biggest thing. You should always think that they know, because they're in there. Even though their voice isn't there, they're there and they know. So, and don't talk around them, talk to them. And if you have a question about their health, ask, because a lot of times they'll tell you. In communicating medical need, and Andrea probably knows this, being an SLP, and Theresa, you as well, is if you can communicate medical need and you need a Toby device and you write that letter and the child can communicate that they're not feeling well or something like that, the insurance companies have a hard time saying no to a child that's communicating that they need something medically. That's just my sense.
Good point. Great point, Shelby.
I would say you should, either if you're a teacher or an SLP who's asking the question, you should just throw out everything that you think and just start fresh and have an open mind. I think that we get very caught up in data and numbers, and the child must tell me that they know every single letter, 8 times out of 10 in order to move on to the next goal. I think that you need to approach the student from a whole student perspective, and not just, like, what can't the child do or the student, and what are the goals for sure. I think you need to be a little bit open-minded, expect inconsistencies. That's a big thought process about Rett syndrome, and get the handbook ASAP.
Yeah, I would piggyback a lot of what Shelby said, presume competence. And my daughter is much the same way. At 3 years old, she thinks it's hilarious to answer incorrectly. And so we often have to ask her again. She gets a big gleam in her eye, though. So when she is teasing you and when she just doesn't know. But that is absolutely a huge thing in our household, too, is that I think the only thing she has control over, the only way she has to make jokes, is to give me the wrong answer. So I think it's important to remember that. And I also think it's important to really understand apraxia. And, if you don't have a lot of knowledge as an educator with that, really get involved with an SLP or someone else to understand what apraxia is and how can it affect someone.
Great. So I think that'll be it today, Katie.
Yeah, so sorry, getting a message from Paige. Let me make sure. Oh, here's one more from Paige.
Yes.
And this is another good one. It's worth it. Can the guidelines be applied with males with Rett syndrome or males and females with MECP2 duplication?
Oh, absolutely. That's really a fantastic question. And yes, they absolutely can. In our chapter on features, characteristics of Rett syndrome, we make it clear that not everyone presents with the same profile. And what we've tried to do is be very expansive and include all possible coexisting conditions, recognizing that not everybody presents that way. The guidelines as they are written are highly applicable to individuals who have complex communication needs, regardless of whatever genetic mutation they have, or even whatever kind of developmental disability they have. There are principles that we've written, especially with beginning with engagement, going all the way through the intervention. They can apply to the folks that you've referenced in the question, as well as other individuals who have autism, who have Down syndrome, individuals who cannot use verbal communication as their primary modality. So people who know a lot about augmentative communication will see lots of familiar information in those chapters on AAC that are highly applicable. So yes, most definitely. Certainly the guiding principles apply to males as well as individuals with other related disorders. So thank you for that question.
Great, thank you. I'm gonna take back presenter so that I can show my screen and close us out for the day. So, you guys see my screen?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay, so, and it started me all over. There we go. So don't forget to grab your communication guidelines. If you haven't gotten them yet, grab them today. You do have two options of print or digital. So get those. And don't forget, we do have the Spanish version coming out soon. And we also have the videos from our previous webinars on our YouTube channel, which you can access either through our site or on YouTube. And our next couple of webcasts coming up are Let's Hear It for the Boys, Males with MECP2 Mutations on April 13th, and What Hurts Part 2, Addressing and Treating Pain and Rett Syndrome on April 23rd. And those are both awesome presentations. So make sure to tune in for those. And like always, if you can't make it to the live presentation and webinar, then if you still register, you will get the recording in your email inbox. Thank you for joining us today, and keep an eye out for the recording to share with whoever you need to share it with, and for the Q&A answers that we didn't get to today.
Thanks to everybody. Thanks to this great panel who I just had the privilege of interviewing, and thanks to my collaborators on the guidelines, and thanks to everyone for your work with our individuals with Rett syndrome on their communication. Thank you.
Thanks, Theresa. Have a great day, everybody.
Bye.